Hello, friends. I think it's no secret that Marvel Comics are one of the most popular and famous in the world. After all, we all know who Spider-Man, Captain America, the X-Men, Iron Man, Thor are, and of course, Deadpool. And we have long been accustomed to the fact that the magical and bewitching universe almost every year pleases us with new films about superheroes, with an excellent plot, and of course, incredible pictures. But what if we delve a little deeper into the epic history of the world-famous company? After all, today Marvel is not just a company that creates graphic novels. This is one of the largest aggregators of comics culture. Its own cinematic universe, its own superheroes and supervillains, stories of true friendship and vile betrayal. The corporation has been creating all this for us for decades. In general, as usual in my videos, today we will figure out where it all began. And of course, we will trace the life path of Marvel from the very idea and the first comics to world blockbusters. But let's start with the fact that Marvel Comics was founded back in 1939 by the young publisher of pulp magazines, Martin Goodman, and was part of a group of companies under the general name Timely Comics. So who is this Goodman? Let's figure it out together. The future founder of Marvel's Moses Goodman, don't laugh, because this is the name that was recorded in the census books of 1910, was born on January 18, 1908 in Brooklyn, New York. He was the eldest of 17 children of Isaac Goodman and Anna Gleichenhays, Jewish immigrants who moved to the States in the early 1890s. In fact, there is no exact information about the Goodman family, but there is some data published in the New York Times that I will rely on in this video. Moses' father worked as a simple tailor in a clothing factory, and the family lived extremely poorly. At school, Moses was simply called Mo. This nickname followed him until graduation and remained with him even after it, only in a slightly interpreted form, because after Mo from Moses successfully became Morris. It is also known that having graduated from school at the age of 16, the young man immediately began to work, since he had to help his parents and contribute to the maintenance of his huge family. At first, Morris worked as a simple clerk at Western Distribution, a company that distributed newspapers and magazines on the East Coast of the United States. And a little later, when the company expanded the list of services it provided and began offering editorial and advertising services to publishers, as well as printing, binding, warehousing, transportation, and foreign sales, Mo itself grew along with the company. By the age of 20, Goodman had already earned a good reputation in a young and growing company, and colleagues noticed that the guy had good entrepreneurial talent. It was this characteristic that helped Goodman in his career, since in his 20s, he became not only a logistics specialist, but also a top manager at Eastern Distribution. It was he, while still a simple worker, who one day came to the office of a business leader and proposed some new directions, which I have already voiced above. At the same time, attention was paid to the guy, and his ideas soon came to life. It is worth noting here that Morris, aka Moses, was truly talented. His energy was in full swing. And even though he didn't have enough resources to quickly implement everything he had planned, he had more than enough thoughts and grandiose plans in his head. In general, management listened to his ideas. This is how a simple boy from a poor family became the top manager of Eastern Distribution. Life, as they say, was getting better, and work brought true pleasure. Moses was already dreaming of how he would soon become a completely wealthy man, in a new beautiful suit, and perhaps even break out into society. But fate, the villain, as usual, made its own adjustments. In October 1929, the New York stock market crashed and chaos struck the entire American banking system, which in turn undermined the U.S. national economy. The incident dealt a huge blow to all industries, also devastating advertising and publishing. One way or another, the black stripe always gives way to a lighter one, so it was in this story. One of the few genres of printing that continued to bring profit to publishers were pulp magazines, or more precisely, cheap multi-page color publications that published sensational, scandalous, and sentimental stories that gave the masses thrills and topics for discussion. Morris Goodman was among the first to recognize this trend. In the summer of 1932, Morris left his job at Eastern Distribution and began using the pseudonym Martin Goodman, a name by which he would be remembered by future generations of publishers. Over the course of several years, he gradually created his own publishing house step by step. Thanks to established connections at his previous place of work, Goodman was able to assemble a small team of people as interested as himself. At the same time, Goodman, in partnership with Louis Silberlight, co-founded several businesses in an effort to capture a new market. But most biographers are sure that nothing more than marriage made a good contribution to the development of his business, no matter how funny and stupid it may sound at the same time. On December 30th, 1934, Goodman married the daughter of wealthy entrepreneur and owner of a large paper box company, Atlantic Container Corporation, Gene Davis. Upon returning from a nearly month-long honeymoon in the Bahamas, Goodman Muscle magazine distributors filed for bankruptcy. Responsibility to the business partner for part of the unfulfilled services under the contract could not be avoided. One way or another, the entrepreneur was not upset, but quickly directed all his strength and capabilities to create a new publishing house called Martin Goodman Publications. It all started there with tabloid magazines with detective stories, adventures, and science fiction. They were unconditionally popular. However, the Superman comic created by DC Comics left every other publishing company a couple of steps behind. Its wild popularity did not pass by Goodman, and he, of course, decided to follow in the footsteps of his competitors by creating a similar product of his own production. The publishing house began its work with the first comic book, which was called Marvel Comics. The main character was the Human Torch, a member of the Fantastic Four, and his rival was Namor the Submariner, the son of a sea captain and princess of the mythical underwater kingdom of Atlantis. No one could have imagined that the comic would fly off the bookshelves like hotcakes, but that's exactly how it happened. The publishing house did not even have enough funds to print a few more copies for sale, and even had to take out money on credit. In general, in those days without television and the internet, comics were something of a breath of fresh air. By the way, the first issues of Marvel Comics were made by a third-party company. The thing is that Goodman entered into a contract with Lois Jacquet, Funnies Inc., to provide him with material for the first comics magazine. Thus, the Human Torch for Funnies Inc., created by artist Carl Burgos and Namor by Bill Everett. The idea itself belongs exclusively to Goodman, but Funnies Inc. officially owned the rights to the Human Torch and Namor. However, by the end of 1940, Goodman bought the characters and decided to start hiring their own writers and artists. In addition, Morris himself was well aware that he still had a lot of ideas and future superheroes in his head. And the next of them was the one who has survived to our time. With the outbreak of World War II as a response to the threats of aggressors against the United States, a new superhero appeared named Captain America. This character was carefully designed by Morris. In his image, he embodied not only patriotic ideology, but first of all, the fighting spirit of all Americans who put the defense of the motherland above their own interests. It was during this period that a new face appeared in the company, the 17-year-old nephew of Goodman's wife, Stanley Martin Lieber. Everyone was sure that Stanley got into timely comics through family connections. However, Lay himself denied this version of his own employment and claimed that he got a job almost by accident, having seen an advertisement in the newspaper. One way or another, he was definitely the youngest employee. At first, the Goodman Publishing House trusted him only to fill inkwells, but soon it came to comics. Already in 1941, he wrote the first lines for the May issue of Captain America, after which he became acting editor. The first thing the young man did was come up with his own pseudonym, slightly shortening his own name to Stan Lee, but about him a little further. But for now, let's return to Captain America. The latter became so popular in the USA that in 1944, the image of this hero from the printed version even moved to the screen. True, the on-screen Captain America had little in common with the patriotic character created during wartime, just a suit. But without a doubt, this hero was familiar to everyone, and therefore increased interest in the film was already ensured in advance. However, the hype, as it is fashionable to say now, did not last long. After all, after the victory over Nazi Germany, there was a sharp decline in the popularity of this hero. People were simply tired of the war. They needed something else. And the demand for Morris Comics fell instantly. Something urgently needed to be done, and in order to keep the company afloat, Goodman even changed the style of the magazines it produced. There was an emphasis on more graphic adventures, romantic stories, and even science fiction. And all the previously created superheroes went into standby mode and gathered dust on the shelves of the publishing house for several years. Actually, America needed something new. It was during this period that such stories as Fantasy World, disturbing stories, wonderful worlds, and a series of comics written specifically for girls were published. However, such stories were not particularly popular. And even though they still had a small circle of admirers, this was not enough to stay afloat. It is difficult to say that from the end of the war until 1960, our hero received any super profits. The publishing house operated as usual. It launched various comics, stories, periodically published tabloid press, and in general it was not particularly noticeable among hundreds of similar companies. In addition, it was difficult to stay in trends, because by the beginning of 1960, the generation of those who still remember the war had already grown up. They were replaced by peaceful youth and students. And at that moment, Morris realized that this was the perfect time to reboot and revive superheroes that had already been forgotten and gathering dust on the shelves. Stan Lee also decided not to be left behind, making its contribution to the development of the company. Thus, through joint efforts, Marvel releases the first comic book about the Fantastic Four, superheroes endowed not only with superpowers, but also with immortality. The main idea of this story is that in the center of the plot are ordinary people who live the lives of ordinary people, like you and me, who just like us, often quarrel, make up and fall in love, and they also study, but in their free time save the world from evil and scoundrels. Thus the reader felt closer to these characters, saw himself in them, and empathized more strongly. Comics of the new four superheroes appeared on store shelves in the same 1960, and they again revived the former glory of this genre, which in turn helped Marvel Comics get out of its prolonged downtime. On the wave of success, it was necessary to reinforce it with new products. Following the Fantastic Four, new mutant superheroes appear, created through various scientific experiments, genetic engineering, or radiation. Among them were the Hulk, the X-Men, and Spider-Man. By the way, about the last one. The first mention of Spider-Man appeared in 1962. The image of this hero has become one of the main symbols of youth culture. The humble, downtrodden guy Peter Parker was even used in a public service announcement promoting drug abstinence. Marvel asked the Department of Health to do this, and Goodman, of course, did not refuse. It is also interesting that at first Morris Goodman persuaded the creator of the Spider-Man story, Stan Lee, not to release this comic, arguing that children were afraid of spiders, and it was unknown how such an unusual plot would turn out for the Marvel budget. However, it was this character that became the most famous in the history of the company's comics. Marvel was on the move again, and all the previously mentioned comics would later be followed by an incredible number of cartoons and feature films. But it was because of one Spider-Man that Stan Lee became one of the most famous people in the industry. Morris, aka Macy Goodman, continued to own Marvel until 1968. He then sold most of his small publishing empire, making Marvel part of a subsidiary called the Magazine Management Company. According to some reports, the leadership position was supposed to go to Goodman's son Charles, but the new owners of the company did not appreciate this step. Instead, the post of editor-in-chief was taken by Stan Lee, who also became the publisher of Marvel Comics. And of course, it is worth noting that after the sale of Marvel, Goodman became a very wealthy man and lived for more than 20 years quietly and calmly, enjoying his old age and traveling. In 1974, he founded another company, Atlas Seaboard Comics, but this project lasted only a year and a half. It is unknown what caused the closure, but everyone is inclined to believe that it was simply Moe's old age. He was no longer able to put a new project on its feet, and therefore went into oblivion. It is also worth saying that with his wife, Jean Davis, Morris had 3 children, Eden, Charles, and Amy. In turn, his children and grandchildren continued his work, and also worked in the industry. Moe died on June 6, 1992, in Palm Beach, Florida. Moe was 83 years old, and, as he himself believed, he had lived a rather interesting and eventful life. In addition, he left a great legacy in the form of many superheroes and comic books. But what happened next for Marvel? Even after receiving the leadership position, Stan Lee still created new heroes. So Spider-Man was replaced by Iron Man. This character was not like any of his predecessors, since he did not have superpowers and moreover, was not a mutant. And the main weapon was exceptional intelligence and technology. The same Iron Man, a glamorous arms dealer, to put it mildly, did not fit into the worldview of the anti-war generation. But his outward invulnerability concealed a wounded essence, which made him an attractive and romantic hero. Marvel couldn't boast of a large number of letters from girls anyway. Well, if they did receive them, then all the girls' messages were addressed specifically to Tony Stark. At the same time, the duo of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby gave readers new stories and even united all the heroes into one team, the Avengers. After a new team of superheroes who could turn invisible, spit fire, or just throw a good punch with a rock became popular, in an incredibly short period of time, A whole series of characters were created that do not leave store shelves and cinema screens to this day. Over the years of releases, the composition of this team has changed dramatically several times to the point that former villains became its members. In 1978, the company changed management again. It was Jim Shooter. Despite the fact that he had a rather unpleasant character, Shooter returned Marvel to its former glory. The company began to revive and set the bar higher and higher, and the new leader helped maintain them over the next 10 years. In 1986, Marvel was acquired by New World Entertainment, and 3 years later by McAndrews and Forbes. At the same time, the first comic book films began to appear on screens: Captain America, Hulk, Spider-Man, and Fantastic Four. In fact, Marvel spent much of the 90s selling the rights to its most famous characters, including Iron Man, the Hulk, Black Panther, and the X-Men. In addition, the company has stepped up its efforts to sell advertising space in its comics and has launched an aggressive licensing campaign for its products in Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. It was a long step that Goodman never decided to take, but in vain. The opening of new borders and the spread of a new culture to other continents definitely affected the company only for the better. It's easy to guess that profits from the sale of rare comics, rights to use this or that superhero, their own toys and collections of cards increased their income several dozen times. However, as often happens, the hype quickly passed, and at some point the company began to incur millions in losses. It was then that the best artists began to leave the sinking ship for competitors. Toy production in the United States became too expensive, and interest in superheroes disappeared, as if they had never existed. After all, it was necessary to keep up with the times. Young people stopped reading comics and became more interested in films and video games. The company could not cope with changes in the market, and soon Marvel declared bankruptcy. The only way to save the publishing house was to merge with another company, and that was Toy Biz. And the future turned out to be not comics, but films. The few films starring Marvel characters produced by different studios in the late 90s and early 2000s were quite successful. From 2001 to 2002, cash holdings more than doubled, reaching levels not seen in nearly 10 years. And net profit in 2002 increased by 300%, while inventories and accounts payable decreased significantly. But all this was nothing compared to what was soon to happen. It was in 2003 that the historical acquaintance of the chairman of the board of directors of Marvel, Isaac Perlmutter, took place with David Maisel, who came up with a simple but very unexpected idea. Why not create your own studio to independently make films based on your comics and take all the profits for yourself? And this proposal turned out to be, no matter how funny it may sound, brilliantly simple. Already in 2005, Marvel management decided to independently film the comic book about Iron Man. It's interesting that Marvel took a long time to choose the character for the film adaptation. Initially, it was planned to make a movie with Captain America, but this hero had already been known for a long time, and a film about Tony Stark was something new. Many risky decisions had to be made during the production of Iron Man. The search for financing and the terms of the deal with banks, writing the script, and casting Robert Downey Jr., who had served time in prison and had drug problems, in the main role. All this was very difficult and risky, but the result exceeded all expectations. The film was released on the big screen in 2008, and in just 17 days, it collected $430 million at the global box office. It was an incredible success and achievement, thus marking the beginning of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. In 2009, the company was bought by Disney, and from that moment on, blockbuster films began to appear that immediately captivated millions of viewers, based on comic book stories. Disney did not change its successful staff, only providing its resources and distributing Marvel products. The first intermediate result of the plan to unite the heroes in one film was The Avengers. In the United States, the film was released on May 4th, 2012, and in the first 3 days it grossed $208 million, setting a record for box office debut weekend. In total, the film earned more than $1.5 billion, becoming one of the 5 highest-grossing films in history. Of course, it would be wrong not to tell you interesting facts about Marvel. So, for example, few people know that Michael Jackson could become Spider-Man. In the early 90s, Michael Jackson tried to acquire the Marvel Comics publishing house, possibly in order to obtain the rights to the Spider-Man character, produce a film with his participation and star in it. I knew Michael Jackson. From what he discussed with me, it seemed to me that he wanted to be Spider-Man. It was a character that he was in love with. Stan Lee told MoviePhone. According to Stan Lee, Michael Jackson would make a very good Spider-Man, but it turned out the way it turned out. It's also interesting that Star Wars creator George Lucas was a big fan of Marvel Comics, and the inspiration for his Darth Vader character was Doctor Doom, arch-enemy of the Fantastic Four and one of the Marvel characters. Another interesting fact is that after the release of the Zombie Story comic in 1973, Marvel trademarked the word zombie and received the exclusive right to use it in comics, and only in 1996 the company gave up this right. Before this, no one could use the word zombie in their comics. What will come as a surprise to Hulk fans is that Stan Lee originally planned to make the Hulk's skin gray, but due to a typographical error in the first issue of the comic where the character appears, he was printed in green. There was no time to change the release date, and Stan Lee approved this option. Since then, the Hulk has been known throughout the world for his green skin, although he was originally supposed to be gray. Marvel also has many unusual records. For example, 0 sex scenes have been shown in the last 10 years. All we got was just a couple of modest kisses. And another record was that it took only 11 days for the film Avengers: Age of Ultron to collect $1 billion at the box office. Mark Zuckerberg earned this amount over 23 long years. And these numbers may be indicative of all of Marvel's greatness. Nowadays, the cinematic universe delights us with new films with incredible plots almost every year. And the younger generation cannot imagine itself without these main characters. And what's interesting is that today, Marvel has a virtual monopoly on superhero content. And besides, the company owns about 45% of the market. And even despite the fact that Marvel has always been a joint stock company that was bought, sold, resold both as a whole and in shares, it still managed to retain the spark that Macy Goodman put into its creation. Each of the leaders gave this company their best years, without regretting a minute about it. And each of them treated the Morris brainchild with great love. They were only trying to maintain at the proper level what a poor guy from the family of a simple tailor had created in his youth. Marvel is a separate life that you want to live again and again. That's why billions of people around the world love everything Marvel. Friends, there is so much said about Marvel on the internet that if I voiced everything, our video would be several hours long. So I decided to take all the fun stuff. I hope I succeeded. Well, the main message is that overcoming the difficult begins with the easy, and the implementation of the great begins with the small. For in the world, the difficult is formed from the easy, and the great from the small. I think Lao Tzu knew what he was talking about. And the fifth phase of Marvel started in 2023. The first film was the threequel Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. The cast includes Paul Rudd, Ant-Man, and Evangeline Lilly, the Wasp. Marvel is on a roll. And at the same time, 2024 has shown that the strategy of releasing fewer films seems to be working quite well. For example, the box office results of Deadpool and Wolverine, which became the only Marvel film released in 2024. In general, write your opinion about what you heard, and of course my general attitude towards Marvel. And for today, perhaps that's all. Please rate the video if you liked it, and see you soon. Bye.